guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly Gimme Radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. I've been a longtime fan of Bone Awl, the raw black metal band hailing from California. So I was excited to learn that Marco Del Rio, one of the founders of that band, had another band called Raspeberry Bulbs that is not necessarily new, but new to me at least. And we were able to chat, and we covered a lot of ground. And here we go. Enjoy. I found out about Raspeberry Bulbs through reading Rue Morgue magazine. Usually, I'm a subscriber, so usually I get the magazine and I read it pretty much cover to cover. And I came across a piece that was written about you guys. And they mentioned that it was, member of Bone Awl, who I'm a fan of, Weird Fiction, and somewhat inaccurately, initially I thought inaccurately, but calling it black metal. So right away, I was intrigued by the whole thing. So I did a relative, as much as I could, a dive into the band's catalog, and I discovered that Nick Forte was also involved. So,
Nick from Rorschach and a bunch of other bands,
Exactly, yeah. So as I started reading up more about the band, I realized that, to me, it was a new project, but the band has been active since 2009. Now, is that information correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not new, really, in any regard. Yeah, it's been around for over 10 years at this point. It's just kind of changed shape a little bit over the years, and just had different people involved over the years. But yeah, it's kind of expanded and contracted a little bit over time. But essentially, it's been a project that I've been working on for over 10 years. Yeah.
Now, did it start out with just you doing things on your own and then slowly putting members together?
Yeah. So it went through a lot of different changes. Started out as just a solo project of me. Had quite a bit to do with just like moving around. So I'm from Northern California, and then I moved to Southern California to Los Angeles for a little bit and was just by myself, and started working on music on my own, trying to learn how to play the guitar, and just kind of, because I played drums and Bone also,
right. Just
kind of, teaching myself guitar, other instruments, teaching myself how to record on my own. And so, it became a solo project, and then kind of grew from there. And then 3 years later, when I was in New York, I just, wanted to, do something different. Did quite a bit just playing by myself, and was just ready to play with other people. So then it became a full band in 2012.
How did you meet up with Nick?
Met Nick, so tried to form a few different incarnations of the band with different people. One of the places that I frequented in New York a lot was the Hospital Records store.
Totally.
So he put out the first Raspeberry Bulbs LP. It was on Hospital. That's just me. That actually came out after the first time I tried to put together a lineup. That all fell apart. Then I ended up re-recording the LP by myself, and then that was released on Hospital. That was an interesting time because I would literally go into the shop all the time because it was relatively close to where I was living. And then I met Jim Siegel, who was working at Hospital, and he's a drummer. And so, I started talking to him, and we started talking about playing music together and trying to get a lineup going. And then we were just looking for people, talking to people. And then Nick Forte was also coming into the store because when he would visit New York from upstate, when he'd visit the city from upstate, he would go to Hospital. And so then Jim started talking to Nick, and then Jim mentioned it to me, then we all started talking. So it was through a hospital shop, basically.
Right on. Was that during the
Which is
era?
cool. Yeah.
Was that during the era when a hospital was in that downstairs space, or when it actually had the larger ground level location?
Yeah. So it was in all of its glory when it had moved up to the ground level shop, and Dominic was living in the store at that point. But it was definitely. I didn't live in New York for that long. I was there for about 5 years. But it was one of the sort of most interesting kind of cultural hubs that existed while I was living there.
Yeah, that was actually a decent time, man. I remember a lot of that stuff's gone these days in New York, and there was this weird sort of heyday of stuff like that, shops like Hospital and other various places around the city that at the time you don't realize how cool that stuff is, and then when it's gone, you realize that you just experienced this this weird era that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it was like the 2000s, early 2000s, through whatever around that time, to whenever it closed.
Yeah,
I think it was kind of it just embodied what was happening in the city at that time. And just a record store like that being in Manhattan was also weird. Like an underground, really, really underground music store being in Manhattan, being in the Lower East Side. I know that there was Kim's and stuff like that, but it wasn't really those stores didn't represent a subculture.
No, I mean Hospital, very specific, man. It was noise, black metal, very very much very fringe stuff compared to what you would get at Kim's.
Yeah, so it's totally strange going in there, in the Lower East Side, which is such a touristy, highly trafficked spot in the city, and then there's Hospital where people are just hanging out. So it was cool. We actually, when Bone Awl did a tour in 2009, Dominic helped us set up the show, and I forget exactly where we played, but when we came into New York, we just drove the van straight to a Hospital shop, parked it, a block over in the middle of the city, and we all stayed at a Hospital. So there was 11 people sleeping on the floor at Hospital.
The good old days.
So
the good old days.
It was pretty. I mean, now I think back on stuff like that, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of insane, and definitely nostalgic, and just a bunch of guys just sitting there. And I think we were in New York for, it was one of those dates that we played where we stopped for a few days and hung out, and we were there for 3 days. And we're just sitting in the store for days, just looking at the records, looking at the CDs, playing CDs in the shop, going to the corner store, getting beer, bringing it back. It was amazing.
Bone Awl is still active, right? Is it still active, Bone Awl?
Yeah. The other guy in Bone Awl, he's never left Northern California, in terms of living anywhere else. So when I was over in New York, it was obviously really hard for us to do anything, but, I visited California a lot, and, we would sort of do stuff whenever we could. So it's been consistent this entire time, but definitely has kind of slowed down, since, the time when I moved away.
There are definitely, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, there's been a few things here and there, and then we've been playing music a little bit more over the last couple of years. I've already been back in California, I think, now for 6 years. So now I've been back here longer than when I was in New York. We just try to do stuff whenever we can. There's actually a new Bone Awl record coming out this year. So it's our first LP came out in 2007. So that's 13 years ago.
Time flies, man. It's scary when you think about it that way, you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities between, I mean, you know, from my familiarity at least, I can see some similarities between Bone Awl and Raspberry Bulbs, but there are definitely some differences. I mean, the obvious one is that you're playing guitar as opposed to playing drums, but both bands seem to have like a very raw, kind of hands-on sort of approach, even to the production of the records. The one thing about Bone Awl is like that there's like this mystery around you guys, because like it's an analog kind of thing with Bone Awl, you know, just cassettes and LPs and things like that. And you know, with Raspberry Bulbs, you know, there's a Bandcamp and digital stuff like that. So, you know, from your perspective,
yeah, I mean,
what are the
definitely similarities in the projects. And I think when Raspberry Bulbs first started, it was kind of, you know, me trying to write songs that were just really similar to Bone Awl. Everything that I learned from playing music and recording music was from Bone Awl. So it was just kind of me like taking that style and trying to put my own spin on it. And, you know, everybody saw, you know, noticed a really strong similarity between the music. It was almost like one and the same. But then like the band just kind of kept going and kept progressing. And, you know, I've upset, you know, music is my life. So it just kind of kept evolving and changing, kind of doing different things. And then eventually it expanded to include other people. And once you get other people involved in a project, and like Nick Forte is playing guitar. So, you know, I for the most part write all the songs still and sort of create the starting points for songs. But when other people are involved, it's going to have that other type of influence. It just kind of seeps into the music. But I mean, and then again, it's like I said, everything I learned from recording, I learned from Bone Awl, which is very simple, primitive, like recording techniques. So I use the same type of 4-track to record Raspberry Bulbs that I do, that we did with Bone Awl. It's just used in a slightly different way, but it's like that I would say is one of the core things that has to stay consistent, is that we're recording to cassette 4-track, or we did one album on a cassette 8-track. So that's like super important, just in terms of capturing the rawness of the instruments in the right way.
Yeah, that definitely adds a unique sort of characteristic to the music, you know. And you know, one of the things is, I mean, Nick, you know, obviously he was in Rorschach, and then some of the other stuff he was doing later on, like what was it? Like Computer Cougar and Beautiful Skin. Was that the name of the band? Not Reflecting Skin.
Yeah,
Beautiful Skin. Yeah.
So many different musical incarnations.
Yeah, and that has like that angular kind of vibe that I mean, when I listen to, one of the differences is like with Bone Awl, there's like this raw punk thing going on, and then there is this like very subtle element of bands like kind of like British bands like The Fall or something like that, or you know, that kind of like, you know, Mark E. Smith kind of vibe to it. And I think that when Nick, see, I'm writing your guys' bio here, you know, it's like maybe when Nick joined the band, that kind of, his style kind of lent itself to fortifying that sound a little bit, I think. Or I might be wrong.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I think it's also just realizing, you know, a band can sort of be taken in certain directions and kind of leaning into that a little bit. And, you know, it's funny how the riffs and all the starting points are very simple. And in my opinion, I think a lot of them could be easily translated into like a Bone Awl type song. But if you just take it if you take it a step in a different direction and you change up the rhythm of the drums or something like that, it kind of creates this whole other thing. So it's like writing that line that's sort of right in between genres, and it shows you all the different similarities that are like right there at an intersection that touches on a lot of stuff. punk, metal, and then whatever you want to call something like The Fall.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like, The Fall in itself is like a really raw, stripped down band that's, I think, extreme in its own regard. Like, especially like Dragnet, I think it's the second Fall album. It's like that album is insanely like just horrible sounding for the sort of reputation that it has. Like, it's a very well-known band and well-known record, but they're like kind of a crazy band in itself too.
Yeah. I read somewhere that the title of the new album, Before the Age of Mirrors, it's something what you said earlier about recording to cassette and using 4-tracks, and that reference for the record title. There's some kind of significance to that as to like a cultural shift from like the turn of the new millennium or something like that. Does that connect with like the production choices and things like that with the band?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I mean, I think it's something that can be like discussed in many different ways for a really long time, but it's just kind of pointing to like the ethos of the band. And definitely, like, you could relate it to the recording technology, like cassette 4-track, like being really strict about sort of, how you treat the music and how you're going to present it. And then, like Raspberry Bulbs was a band that it was similar to Bone Awl. We would only release our music on cassette tapes and LPs, and just sort of trying in those like simple ways of just like keeping an underground tradition alive, and just, the layouts, the way, using a Xerox machine to make the cover, using a typewriter to, make parts of the design. So it's actually just trying to keep this tradition alive that's sort of being dragged on like way too far in the future. In whatever ways that we can. I mean, I grew up like right around the turn of the century. I was 16 when it was the year 2000. So I am part of this generation that like just fully saw technology come in and change everything. Like I think when you're 16 to 18 and all of that, like that's kind of when you're the most sensitive to like what's happening culturally, especially I was super into underground music at that time. So I just like noticed everything. So it's just, trying to remind people that history is really important. You need to like look into the past. You need to understand where things come from. And obviously the most important stuff is going to be coming from before 2000. And like I experienced that firsthand. And then, it's just something that me and all my friends and contacts are constantly talking about. It's like Jim and Nick, they're both older guys. They're in their 40s. And so they actually like lived the culture of the 80s, which is amazing to me. And so it's just like, that's the time that I'm obsessed with. I think that right now everything is just horribly confused and really, really difficult to understand. And I don't think it's like an atmosphere that creates good art and good music in any way. And yeah, just sort of focusing on before 2000 and before things totally changed.
I tend to agree, and a lot of that has to do with just I'm in the same age group as like Nick, and I'm in that age group that grew up in the 80s, and like I've always had a very strong affinity to the physical world, and being able to hold something in my hands, being able to actually produce something physical. It's almost like the idea of art is it starts in your imagination. And when it's in this digital context, it seems like it never actually comes to life, to me at least, unless it's like a physical object that you can put your hands on. So, I mean, I can appreciate what.
Well, I mean, yeah, 100%. And then it's like, the records go to record stores. The records are at the venues where you're seeing the band. The band is selling T-shirts. Like, it all fits together and creates the subculture. And, you know, those are the things that we grew up obsessing over. And, you know, like, I'm sure you remember the feeling of, like, when the first record came out with your music on it. You know, like,
oh yeah,
because you're obsessed with those things when you're a kid, and you're like, man, records are so interesting and cool, and you start collecting them, and then eventually it's your own band's music on a vinyl, and it's like, it's one of those moments where it's one of the best moments of your life. And then, you know, like, and then, you know, you have a band, it grows, you know, you do more and more, and then as your band is evolving and stuff, it's like the ground is falling out from under you, like, as you're making progress. And I think that's something that's really specific to the 2000s, early 2000s, was just when you know, people are still selling records and all that, but it was just changing so fast at that point.
How easy was it for you to get your hands on a functioning 4-track recorder? I mean, it seems like that's kind of hard to come by these days.
Yeah, I actually, you know, Brandon or Hugh who gnashes teeth from Bone Awl, he got the first one, and I think he actually bought it from a music store. So it's probably like late 90s, early 2000s, probably right around like 2000. I think you could go to a music store and still buy gear like that.
Really? Huh.
I remember it was expensive. It was like, you know, I think this is the story. I might be fucking it up, but I think it was like $300 to $500 for a new cassette 4-track.
Wow.
And he just had the idea, and he was like, I want to, you know, this is how you do it. You record your band's first demo. This was a totally different band too, like our high school band. And he just picked it up at a music store, and then showed up at band practice with us one day. I think that's the story. And then after that, it's like, then you know what it is, and you know what the model is, like the Tascam classic 4-track, and then you can just find them online. And it's like, you know, now we're in the era of like eBay and stuff, and you've been able to find them on eBay for you know, 20 years now.
Yeah, I remember back in the 90s, in some of the first bands I played in, the drummer picked up one of those, and I remember, you know, we were all gathered around this thing at the coffee table, and it was like, you know, this guy figured out how to use it, and I thought he was like Captain Kirk at the Starship Enterprise trying to figure out how to use this thing, you know what I mean? And yeah, those are cool, man. I damn, it's like it's cool because you're limited in what you can do. You don't have like this unlimited track count that you can work with, or you can't punch in like every, you know, and have a click track and like all this crazy stuff these days.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm not a very complicated person, and my understanding of these things is very limited. So it just works. And then one of the things where you get into it, you're immersed in it, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it's like, it sounds good. It's for what it is. It sounds really good. And then you get used to that sound. And of course we like, you know, around the same time we're like listening to a lot of black metal. Black metal is really, a lot of the times, really hard recording, really poor production quality in a good way. And so we're like, oh, we can recreate this feeling with this 4-track. And like it all just kind of worked perfectly. But yeah, like you were saying, like the limitations that are there, I think are really important, because you learn how to do a lot with a little. And you know, I don't want things to get overly complicated. And so that's why I still love the way that it sounds. I've tried to record, not a lot, but I've been in studios before, and I've tried to record in other ways, and it just never, for some reason, just doesn't work for me. Like it's like, I just haven't found the right situation to create something that actually ends up sounding good. So I always just fall back on the cassette machines.
Yeah. One of the things I really enjoy about the lyrics is that there's references, at least in, you read something about the band and they talk about, you being into weird fiction, and of course the name H.P. Lovecraft comes up, but it's if none of those references had been made and I just got a lyric sheet, I still would come up with that, only because I think if you're a fan of that type of writing, if you remove all the names, like Sarnath and Cthulhu and, Shub-Niggurath and all that sort of stuff, you take all that stuff out of there, there's still the kernel of those types of stories and those types of, that sort of environment that's being portrayed by the lyrics. And the lyrics are very, they have this sort of like laconic sort of quality to them. Like they're very economical in the way that things are phrased and everything. So, I mean, if I'd never read anything by H.P. Lovecraft and I read your lyrics, I wouldn't necessarily pick up on that. But if being a fan of that type of fiction, it comes across in the actual stories within the songs. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
No, I mean, that's great, and kind of exactly, exactly the impression that I'm hoping it makes is that it's not just completely literal where you're just referencing something. It's more about the feeling and sort of the technique of weird fiction and just the overall atmosphere that's kind of coming through. And it allows the band to be original in its own way and to kind of have its own subject matter, but then still trying to fit into that world and that tradition. Which again, like that ties back to the theme. It's like, been into that type of stuff, weird fiction and Lovecraft, since I was early teenager. And it's just been this thing that's to the side of music. And then I found out about it sort of through music, but it's one of those things that's like, you have it in like your utility belt or whatever, but it's not necessarily related to what you're doing. But then over time, you just realize that the two things are completely interrelated. And, there's so many different Lovecraft references in underground music, and especially metal and black metal and death metal. I mean, probably death metal the most in the 80s. There's just so many like song titles that are like a Lovecraft story.
In a very obvious way, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, in a super obvious way, but you just realize, like this is just like totally just part of music culture.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to tie those two things together. But I think the other thing is that weird fiction now, it's like, it's such a deeper thing. It's such a bigger world. It's like a huge world unto itself, and metal and underground music doesn't really do a great job of showing the depth there and just giving insight into like this other sort of parallel universe that exists, which, I mean, I don't think I'm really doing a much greater job, but it's like, I think, the music should be like a gateway to certain things. And it should be, there's like this underground tradition of music, like introduces you to all these things, to like spirituality and to like writers and fiction, and
yeah,
and it's mostly like older stuff. And I mean, I want to make sure that the band is like still like doing that, still adhering to that tradition too.
Yeah, I've always kind of viewed extreme music and weird fiction or fantasy literature or science fiction, all that stuff sort of came as one package for me when I was growing up as well. Writers like Michael Moorcock, I got into that through listening to heavy metal, and oddly, Lovecraft came to me from reading Conan, and that was like way when I was like a very young kid. Before I even knew about metal, I was like reading Conan, and then I found out that he was pen pals with H.P. Lovecraft, and that's whatever. That's a long story, but like
totally.
That's how I discovered it.
Yeah, it's like one of those, like everything should sort of potentially be a rabbit hole that you can kind of fall down, but it's something that's very relevant. I think it's not like all these things are connected for a reason, it's because they should be relevant to the fan and to the person who's like seeking all this stuff out. But exactly, it's like, you know, you would learn about maybe like Conan sword and sorcery stuff through science fiction or through heavy metal, like Sirith Ungol covers or whatever.
Yeah.
And then that connects to other things. And then you realize that Robert Howard was a pen pal of H.P. Lovecraft, and he's like, there's that whole era of weird fiction where there's this like circle of pen pals, like Lovecraft's peers and all of that. And all of that stuff kind of branches off into different areas too. And it's so cool and fascinating. And like, that's what I want underground music to be. I don't want it to be about, you know, social media and all this, like all these distractions.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, though I do enjoy like the really, you know, obvious, you know, occult and like satanic stuff that happens in extreme music, I also like when it goes a little bit further out on the fringes with some of the philosophies, like some of the stuff that you can find that have little to do with an actual sort of orthodox idea about darkness or Satan or whatever. And it has something to do more with like this, because, you know, Lovecraft didn't really believe, wasn't necessarily a spiritual person. He just thought of like the universe as this sort of unknowable thing. And that's when music connects with that sort of feeling, that's what gets me really excited. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like that being said, I'm still a fan of like really blatant Lovecraft reference. Like if your song is called Shub Niggurath, I'm like, oh, cool. And it's like a band from the 80s, or like, you know, there's like a death metal band from Mexico called Shub Niggurath.
Yep.
I'm like, that's great. Like just the fact that they're, you know, they have these different touch points and they're into it. They're inspired by it. It fits in with the way the music sounds and the artwork looks. Like I am obsessed with all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But for me, it's like, I don't want it to be on the nose. Like it's 2020. It's not 1986. Like you have to kind of try a little bit harder, to like put your own stamp on it and not just, you know, have a song, that's like a Lovecraft story.
Now the name Raspberry Bulbs is, kind of an unusual name. So where did you come up with that name?
Yeah, again, it's like it's not trying to be blatant in references. Like rather, it's trying to come up. You know, it's a name that ended up as like I was writing lyrics and I was writing poetry, and it was from a line in one of the lyrics that I was writing. The raspberry bulbs were mentioned in that line, and then. So then at the time I just decided to make that the band name. And you know, it's funny because I was just doing this little side project to Bone Awl, and it was just going to be this tape. And it just like the drummer like releases a solo project on a tape, like just kind of this really low key thing. And so I put it together and I wanted that to be the band name. And then I wanted the artwork to be pink. So obviously all the records are pink. And I didn't put too much thought into it. I'm totally fine with the band name and I'm fine with what I like, you know, it excites me like what it is. But at the time I was just kind of putting these things together and wasn't really thinking about, you know, is it really, are people going to be really, really confused by it? I definitely knew, like, if you make a pink sort of underground tape at the time, it's not going to look like all of the other black metal tapes that are in a distro or whatever, you know, or in a mail order. Like, it definitely was intended to, like, stand out like this really, really strange thing. Like, I wanted it to be just, I wanted it to totally stand out as this, like, strange object, like something completely different. Even though it looks like a punk demo tape or, you know, an underground demo, within the context at the time, it stands out. But I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be like still talking about the band name 10 years later.
No, because when I first,
but no, so it's like I could go into the details of what the poem was about, but it was about, so the first demo tape is called "The Raspberry Bulbs Finally Burst with Fluid," and it's about it's about the plant, like a raspberry plant, and the fruit keep growing. So the fruit, they essentially can't stop growing, and they grow to the point where they explode. And so it's this kind of gross image, but it's like a life form that has too much energy inside of it and doesn't know when to stop growing, and it just kind of goes too far. So that's kind of the idea.
no, I was hoping it was something like that actually, because when I first came across the band name, I thought it was like this kind of garage, like psychedelic sort of thing. And then I delved a little deeper into it and listened to the music, started reading some of the lyrics, and then the imagery that came to my mind was something strange and uncomfortable like that. So
yeah. It's funny because I've talked to, like, over the years, like I've, talked about this many times, and so many people were like, oh yeah, that's like a very like Bay Area, like psychedelic rock kind of name. And the thought never even crossed my mind. There's like Strawberry Alarm Clock and the Moby Grape, and that's what people think when they hear the band, or that's what some people think when they hear the band name. And I'm just like, whoa, okay, like I totally understand why you're getting that vibe, but I never would have thought that at all. But it's definitely confusing. I understand it. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around. It takes a second to, like, for a person to it takes effort for a person to try to put it into context, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely fits the more you get into listening to the music. Like to date, I only really familiar with like 3 of the records at this point. Obviously the new one, Deformed Worship and Privacy. And I think you guys have more than that out though, I think, right? Like you have like a bunch of demos and crazy stuff like that.
Yeah, there's one LP, the Hospital record, that was just me. That's the first LP.
Is that still available anywhere? Could I buy that at a distro or something like that? Or is that online?
It is not available. Yeah, it's not available physically. It's online at this point. But yeah, Nature Tries Again. That's the first record.
Okay.
But yeah, the first thing I wanted to say was that it's awesome that you found out about the band in Rue Morgue. And it's like that. See, like, I was so excited that they wrote and wanted to do an interview, because that's exactly the kind of thing that I'd want to do. It's like,
yeah,
I don't really know Rue Morgue. I remember like Fangoria growing up, as like the horror magazine, but it's like, that's exactly what I wanted, what I would have wanted to do as a 12-year-old, is like do an interview in a horror magazine. Like, that's so cool to me. Whereas, like, it's fine to do an interview for a website or whatever, but I never like fantasized about doing that when I was a teenager.
I share the same sentiment about that. And, I mean, I don't know if you've checked out the actual issue that you guys are in, but it's got this beautiful painted cover with Christopher Lee and Jack Palance on it.
No, I have it. Yeah, I have the issue, and I am probably going to subscribe to the magazine because it's so cool. It's like, I wasn't like, I like horror movies when I was a kid and stuff, but I never was like obsessed. I was never like into the culture of all that kind of stuff. But now I think everybody just watches a ton more movies now, and it sort of touches on everything. It has like books, it has bands, it has movies, it has new stuff, it has old stuff. I just love shit like that.
Yeah, I've been a long time subscriber, and I'm very much a horror fan. Like I'm ever since I was a kid,
awesome.
I've been way into horror, and I think it's probably the best magazine out there that covers horror, because the approach is a little bit different. It's not so much about who buys more ads in the magazine, and it really is more of like really highly curated content as opposed to like who spent more money on advertisements, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great. And at this point, again, it's like, it's even surprising that a magazine can still exist and that it can have subscribership and that someone can find out about your band through getting a magazine in the mail or whatever at a newsstand. Like, I don't know, that I love all that stuff, but it's just, it's hard to stay involved on that level and to try to keep those things alive.
Yeah. Have you, being a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, you know, my opinion at least is that it's been very hard to capture his work on film. Have you seen the new Color Out of Space film?
I have. I actually got together with a buddy who's another like weird fiction fan, and we watched it a couple of weeks ago. We were like, it wasn't bad. Or like, you know, it wasn't that bad, but again, yeah, I don't think you can really translate it into a film. I can't like right now think of a way that you could like effectively do it. I think that horror movies are something that are kind of very different from weird fiction too. Like, it's like there's like the mystery, there's the absence of things in weird fiction that makes you so like fixated on it because you just, you know, you create your own impressions. It creates an impression on you. You create your own visuals. You sort of, you know, it's kind of like you have to fill in all these gaps, whereas the movie can't leave any of the gaps out. Or they haven't really found a way to do it that's effective. So it was a fine movie, but it was just kind of a certain type of horror movie. And I do really like, there's a movie called Dagon, which is like,
Yep,
I don't know who the director, there's like Brian Usna is the producer on all these movies.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's Reanimator, there's From Beyond, and then there's Dagon. And those are three of my favorite horror movies.
Yeah, the Stuart Gordon directed those, who recently passed away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah, I knew that I always thought the producer was the guy who made the movies, but it's like him and the director did those. And they're some of the best horror movies ever, but they're like really great horror movies. They're not necessarily like really great works of like Lovecraftian art.
Yeah, that's how I would say the same thing, because similar to what you said, you know, the Lovecraft stuff and weird fiction in general, there's not a lot of action. It's not like there's like zombies chasing people, you know, across a post-apocalyptic landscape or anything like visual like that. There's a lot of things are told like in flashbacks, and there's like atmosphere, which doesn't necessarily translate into, you know, an interesting film. You know, it might be something you can look at maybe, but then again, you know, the color out of space is this color no one's ever seen before. So now we've seen it, or we've seen someone's impression of what it might look like. And that's kind of, you can't really succeed with an effort like that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, like even the movie in itself is kind of abstract. They don't ever show like a monster. You know, there's like, it's a lot of like body horror kind of stuff. Like people kind of start deforming, and it's kind of like the thing with all the like body horror stuff, which is cool, but they don't really show the monster. But it does. Yeah, I don't know. I think it needs to be in the written. There's something that really lends itself to the written form. That just like, it just leaves that impression on you. It just keeps you wondering, the like mystery of it, the implications of it. It just stays with you. I mean, I remember like reading The Color Out of Space, and there's a part in the story where he talks about how he thinks that the trees are moving, or he saw it, like he wasn't sure. He was in a weird state of mind, but he thinks that like the trees were moving. And I remember reading that and actually like feeling freaked out by it.
Yeah, exactly.
But then if you think about and then if you think about it in like a movie and you're like, oh, like the tree moved, like the branch moved and it like grabbed this guy. Like that would be, it's so stupid in a movie, and it's happened so many times in different movies where like someone gets wrapped up in like a vine. It just, it's two totally different ways of like executing something. And it made this crazy lasting impression on me when I read it in the Lovecraft story. But then if it's in a movie, it's like, I don't know, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, just our minds, the way we translate that written word is different for everybody. And then there is something lost, I think. Like when you're reading something, one of the reasons why I love, reading literature so much is that there is that connection of like your mind assembling a series of images and a different version of reality. And then when someone else translates it, it's their own very subjective point of view on that same sort of thing. And it just doesn't, a lot of times it never really meshes together very well.
Yeah. And I think the movie was totally fine. I think they did like sort of the best job that they could. And then obviously it kind of has to be like modernized in a bunch of different ways. But with those things, it's always going to come down to like the subtlety, and it's like, you can't show too much, but you still have to, you still have to make this weird. You still have to impress the viewers and try to accomplish that. So it's not easy. I mean, I definitely feel like we're living in like I think there's going to be a big Lovecraft renaissance in the 2020s or whatever. And I think there's like a lot of comics coming out now. There always have been, but I think there's going to be more than ever coming up. I mean, there's going to probably be movies. I'm just really scared when there's going to be the big blockbuster, like Call to Cthulhu movie.
Yeah.
I'm just terrified, like what that thing
Vin Diesel starring in it or something like that. Like Vin Diesel and
yeah. Well, there's
Statham.
there's that guy Guillermo del Toro, and he's like a really, really mainstream movie guy now, and he's talked about how he's been trying to do Call to Cthulhu for like the last 20 years, and he was going to do it, and then the studio like pulled the budget, and so I don't know. I mean, he's like a horror obsessive. I'm not that crazy about his movies, but I feel like somebody's going to do it soon, and it's not going to be good.
Well, thanks a lot, Marco. I appreciate taking time and doing this. And, the new record's out on Relapse. And I know that just based on what we discussed for the last hour or so, that you're not a very big fan of like social media and all that sort of stuff. But where can people that would be listening to this connect with you guys online?
Yeah, I mean, Relapse put up a Bandcamp, just like how they do with all their bands. So there's that sort of way of finding the music and checking it out, and just got to dig around. Like everything's on the internet at this point, so we're on there. I don't have any social media or anything like that on purpose, just to try to silence a very loud world of media and stuff. But yeah, I mean, anything you could want to know about the band is out there and pretty easily accessible.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Gimme Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android, for one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week. Take care.